Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAC Culture Talks 2025. I'm Jing Han, the Director of the Institute for Australian and Asian Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Baramatical people of the Darug Nation, who are the traditional owners of the land for thousands of years, and pay our respect to the First Nations elders, past and present. For our IAC Culture Talks Lecture 2, we are super excited to hold this very unique and fascinating talk entitled Word Matters, Interpreting for State Leaders by Professor Charles Qin, Qin Lushan 教授. Interpreting for state leaders requires exceptional language proficiency, in-depth subject knowledge, and capacity to operate under immense pressure. It is not a profession or line of work that we hear about in our daily conversations, nor is it as easy as one would assume that as long as you speak two languages, you can do that job. So we are very privileged to have Charles to give us this talk. Briefly, Professor Charles Qin was born and received his BA in English literature in China. He moved to Australia in the 1990s and received his MA in interpreting and translation from Monash University. He is an adjunct professor and a visiting professor in several universities in China. He has had more than 40 years of interpreting experiences in China and Australia and around the world. And he has interpreted for many Australian, Chinese, and international state leaders. Charles will share with us the cultural and linguistic challenges in this profession and some of his very interesting experiences. And he will also touch on the role that AI plays in interpreting, and if AI is ready to take over our human brain and human language. Now, please welcome Professor Charles Qin, OAM, to give the talk.
Thank you, Professor Han. Let me share my screen. Good afternoon, colleagues. Thank you, Professor Han, and thank you, Lindsay, for your support behind the scene. Colleagues, good afternoon. I'd like to also thank Professor Han, and also I can see the attendees include my old teacher, Professor Udis Ozelens, and also our colleagues, OSIT President Carl Fulton, and my other good friend and colleague, IAC member Sydney Ye. So welcome, everyone. Now, as Professor Han mentioned, I was born in China, educated in China, and also worked in China for some time before I moved to Australia in 1991. So I was made in China. As you can see, I was young once. That is my photo. And those days are very different from now, as you can see. Also had education in Australia, not at Monash. I'm a Monash fellow, but I was not educated in Monash, but at Beacon University. So that's a small correction. Probably the online information is quite incorrect nowadays. When I first came to Australia, in those days, life was very different. As an interpreter too, as now very different. I didn't have driver's license and I didn't have a car. I don't know how to drive because we rode bikes in China and I still ride bikes now. And I think bicycle probably the easiest and the most efficient transportation means to get me wherever I will be at, and I won't be late. So I started to work in 1980s. So this was one of the earlier photos of me working for my commissioner. When I started out in Australia, as most people would be in a similar situation as I was, the interpreters in Australia, translators in Australia are doing mostly community work. Of course, some other people are doing commercial work and also business, political, diplomat, but that type of work is quite small. Mostly my colleagues, and even now I do a lot of work for courts. So the sectors in the community, including like schools, hospitals, police, courts. And in fact, my first biggest job, in fact, was a murder case. And with that murder case translation, I bought my first computer. And in those days, computer was very expensive. And also you need to have special Chinese software. So that was the situation. One thing I want to mention was that the rate of pay for our industry is getting worse. It's not getting better, because in those days I was getting paid more in 1990s than most interpreters and translators working in the community setting now. I'll start with talking about interpreting translation. And a lot of people outside our sector do not understand interpreting or translating. They think they call it translate. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. I'm sure most colleagues here, we don't have the problem. Now, I'd like to share a video
that nobody else can do. We're going to get the drug prices down, not 30 or 40%, which would be great, not 50 or 60. No, we're going to get them down 1,000%, 600%, 500%, 1,500%, numbers that are not even thought to be achievable, because I've used a certain talent that I have and convinced the drug companies that you have no choice. The drug companies.
Now, you have heard what President Trump just said. If we encounter this situation, and clearly you can tell President Trump has made a lot of mistakes. Mistakes such as we're going to reduce the drug price not by 50%, not by 60%, but 1,000%, 600%. That mathematically, that's very wrong. Now, what do we do as an interpreter? If a world leader you are doing interpreting and they're making serious mistakes, and if do we need to interpret everything he said, or are we going to correct their mistakes? Now, we're going to have a few more examples, and we can discuss. There are other problems in translation and interpreting. This is another serious one. I was told by a diplomat that this was a serious mistake caused by the North Korean translator, because Australia at the early days established diplomatic relationship with North Korea. However, one day, out of blue, Australia did not know why North Korea severed the diplomatic ties with Australia. Later, we found out that because there was an instance of a cherry tree being chopped down, and they saw there was an axe. And as you can see, the axe on the top said "Made in Australia." Clearly, the translator thought it was Australia. They said, since the axe was made in Australia, so we should sever the diplomatic relationship with Australia. But turned out it's Austria. So we still haven't resumed our diplomatic relationship. So the translation or the translator, they're playing a very important role. One small mistake cause very big and serious consequences. And also during the COVID period, it's very tense period. We all remembered between China and Australia, China and other countries, particularly as you can see here, the spokesperson Hua Chunying of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in China, and she mentioned that there were English translation they got wrong. So there were problems too. And we understood that there were actions taken, particularly between Australia and China, not because of translation issues. And other issues probably is more close to our region and to the Chinese community and to English and Chinese languages. Here, as you can see, recently people are discussing about the word acknowledge. The communique between China and America, the English word was acknowledge, but the Chinese became 承认. 承认 is recognize. It's very different. And again, America now, they were saying that it's we acknowledge Taiwan, or the China stance on Taiwan. We don't recognize it. We just acknowledge it. So they are changing their national policy. That's, again, people say, is this a translation issue, or it's different meanings? Another one is very recent. In fact, I'm sure most people have read this article. Is talking about it in the Alaskan meeting between Blinken and Wang Yi. And the term was from a position of strength. Now, Chinese understanding, as you all recall, was that from the position of strength was translated in a way that I'm dealing with you from using my strength to as a stance, more like to defeat you. So it's very condescending. China was really unhappy. But in English, from the position of strength is quite different meaning in linguistic sense. However, there were analysis done saying that this was very similar and consistent to Reagan's diplomacy. But we are not experts in diplomacy and in the history. We are linguists. So from this particular term, position of strength, it was mistranslated into Chinese. And I wrote an article, and it's online if you're interested. So again, this caused a lot of grief between China and America, again, from its wrong interpreting and the translation. The other thing I found, you all heard from the news, is that in English, we often say, particularly from Australian point of view, we are dealing with China, we are not conducting megaphone diplomacy. And the word megaphone into China, and China started to report it, called a microphone. So it's quite, again, different different meaning, megaphone and microphone. So again, it's misinterpreting, or the interpreter didn't hear properly. That's the problem there too. Here, 领导纠正议员, our leaders correct interpreters interpreting. And here, as you can see, reported in China that Premier Li Keqiang corrected Zhang Lu's interpreting, and one applaud from the media. And here is because one-off, and Zhang Lu missed out the words one-off. China is also a big beneficiary from the trend. One-off is one of the, and she missed that, and he corrected her. So interpreters on the watch by the leaders too. Again, other things you remembered too was the common mistakes like battery and magazine in the military sense. We all remembered that when Russia invaded Ukraine and also other terrorist attacks, they start to use the terms such as battery and magazine. And the battery become like battery for car, like cell battery, and the magazine become reading magazine, all these problems. And the other issue is we often hear is house speaker is often being translated into Chinese media, and also sometimes they do SI, simultaneous interpreting online. It became a spokesperson for White House. Again, two serious mistakes, because House, it really means House of Representatives, not White House. And also speaker is not spokesperson. So those are some of the common mistakes. Now, coming back to Australia, and as you can see, this is a screenshot from ABC they use the word here 外交部北亚司一等助理秘书. Now, 一等助理秘书, what is it? 秘书 in Chinese is not very senior position. 助理 assistant 秘书 or assistant secretary even lower, but suddenly it becomes 一等 first level or level 1. What is it? And it's very inaccurate translation. And there is a 助理秘书 assistant secretary who is more senior. So these are all very serious, in fact, mistakes because 一等助理秘书 first assistant secretary in Chinese, there is equivalent in Chinese called the 司长 director general. That's the translation. But for some reason, ABC, which is very influential media, translated into 一等助理秘书, and most Chinese leaders have no idea what you're talking about. The other one is in recent times, we have seen the Labour Party's policy towards China, a relationship where we can cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and engage in the national interest. And I saw online, if the Chinese leader heard this, I don't know how much they understand it. It means that what in Chinese says, 我们愿在双方能够合作的领域开展合作，在必要时表达意见，做出符合澳大利亚国家利益的决定。Now, this 意见, this word, if it's written language, is very clear. But if it's spoken, people think it's a point of view rather than disagree. So that's bad interpreting in that sense. And also, it's so European or Anglicized Chinese, and I'm not sure the Chinese leadership would understand very easily. And so this is my translation, my interpreting, and I heard from the Chinese ministers, they're happy with my interpreting. It's 能合作就合作，有分歧讲分歧，以国家利益为重开展交流. This is the true meaning. They immediately understood, and then they replied that, we fully agree, we fully support, and we respect how you carry out your relationship with China. So that's why the relationship is very amicable at the moment. Now, the other thing is that the interpreters getting sued. We know that in court cases, and also we heard when Trump in office last time, there were only 4 people in private meeting, Trump, Putin, and the 2 interpreters. And I remember when American Congress, they were trying to get what was discussed, but they can't ask Trump to disclose, and they were trying to subpoena the interpreter. So that's the problem too. And I have myself, in fact, participated in some of those meetings, just 4 of us. I'm very lucky in Australia, so I'm not subpoenaed to give evidence. This is very recent. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese's recent visit to China, and this is, to me, is very historic because this is the first time and the second time that I was sitting next to the national leader. Normally, I'm sitting behind and no food. Like a couple of weeks ago, we were in the Great Hall of the People. I was there for a long, long time, over 10 hours, and no food. But in Shanghai, for some reason, they gave me a seat sitting next to PM. And also in Chengdu, again, I was sitting down, and the PM came to me and was sitting down, have lunch. These are some of the photos I worked for some Australian prime ministers, and this is Scott Morrison, very famous, we all know. And when President Jiang visited Australia, I was one of the interpreters, and he was probably the most charming and charismatic president of China because he wrote poems and he can write poem on the spot. I remember my colleagues in China were telling me that he was writing poems on the spot quite regularly. So interpreters in foreign affairs ministry got really worried because we don't understand poems he was writing on the spot. So they collated all the poems he wrote and translated properly. So next time when he re-quote his own poem, so they know what to do. And he heard that MFA has translated his poems. He said, "Oh, can you give me a copy of your translation so I can next time use English poem I wrote Chinese you translated." And then this was when President Hu visited Australia and was the first interpreter doing simultaneous interpreting in the Australian history in the Parliament. As you can see, I was terribly young at the time, 2003, 24th October. So that was well over 20 years ago. And Premier Wen visited Australia. Now, when he visited Australia, Ambassador Fu Ying was the ambassador to Australia. Now, she introduced me to Premier Wen, and Premier Wen asked me a question, and I don't know how to talk to them. I know how to talk to interpreters, and in the end, I said, Premier, do you want a cup of tea? And I understand now why the royal family members, when they have nothing to talk, they always say, do you want to have a nice cup of tea? Now, this was the national gift to Premier Wen. Probably later, you can tell me what the national gift to China. Think about it. And other visits to China, I think this one was with Defense Minister visiting Chinese PLA, People's Liberation Army. I've never had so many guards of honor in my life. Almost every 2 hours there's one. So this is very unusual. I know Trump wanted to have one, but became a big failure, and China does it very well. And also, by the way, the best food in China is in PLA headquarters. Now, this is Prime Minister Abbott, and again, it's good gift, but I think we all worry that I think your concern, my concerns are the same, that he may drop it, and it's very expensive gift. Now, this is coming to the Australian term, budgie smuggler, and I don't think any people would understand this term from China. And by the way, these photos are from the public domain. Most people in China couldn't understand how fit our PM Tony Abbott is. And this is Mr. Kevin Rudd, who speaks very good Chinese. By the way, he also corrects my interpreting. I think he corrected me, my English or Chinese, I think both. Now, again, this is from the media talking about he eats earwax. And this is a female PM Gillard, and unfair to women. And she had for the media reported very widely. And Mr. Howard, to me, I think he is a very good leader to work with. He very proudly said many times that he was the first and the only Western leader to separate trade and the human rights with China. So under his term of office, the relationship between China and Australia in trade terms jumped significantly. His eyebrows, and that's quite different. Now, this is a very wealthy Prime Minister, Mr. Turnbull. I think this photo is very interesting because a lot of people commented that Zhang Lu's face facing the same as Li Keqiang, and my face following Turnbull's face to the same direction. So we really following the same directions, following our own leaders. And even though here there are only 3 of us, however, there are hundreds of people, including the police officers and everyone behind the scene. There are many, many people, even though only 3 having a walk. And this was in New Zealand with Zhang Lu, so we worked together. She was Premier Li Keqiang's interpreter for many years. And I think for a Chinese interpreter, our dream is to work at least once in Zhongnanhai, in Ziguangge. And I think I made it. I've been there a few times, and this one had a good photo too. So I always say to people that you must have a dream. Maybe the dream will come to reality. So it became reality. And this was a great help to people when Vice President at the time, as you can see, the interpreter already now started to practice being moved away. Normally you are sitting behind the leader, but they put me behind the ambassador. And now more and more interpreters are not on the scene, and we are outside different room or far away, but they have equipment for us, and we can hear even though we are like meters away. And the media wants leaders in the picture, and the leaders want themselves in the picture. They don't want anyone else in the picture. And when President Xi vice president came to Australia and president came to Australia. And I was very lucky and fortunate to be part of the team. Our company, in fact, sent 10 interpreters to Tasmania to help the tour and the visit. And my colleagues, including Jinxin and John and other people who work for international organizations. These are some of the photographs. Also, I did some interpreting early days for American presidents at international conferences, people making fun of him. People are young, they don't remember, saying that his genetic traits are different and other people's are going the normal way, round. He's quite straight, like a zebra. Now, this is Bush again. This is APEC or OPEC? This is another question as we had earlier. If the leader made mistake, what do we do? And when he was in Sydney, and I was doing interpreting at APEC when he was speaking, and he said, came to OPEC, and we know that he was attending APEC, so we would translate as in 亚太经合组织, not 石油输出国组织, and we make that correction. But if back to that earlier question, the example I made, probably we can have a discussion later if a leader is making so many mistakes. My company and myself, we been working in this industry for a long time, and Australia gave us a great opportunity for us to work in this wonderful country. So we want to give back to our country, to our industry. So we set up a scholarship program at Monash because people give money to science, to medicine, and very few people give to our small industry. And I was starting that. And then Melbourne University, there's one coming soon. And also at Deakin, there are two coming soon. Again, I was very honored for my work as an interpreter and a translator, the contribution to Australia through interpreting translation. I was awarded Australian Order, and again, became fellow at Monash, and very happy to work with Jinxin and John, won Best Interpreter in Australia, 2013, 2025. Okay, and also one label, and as Professor Han mentioned, in other universities in China. Now, very quickly, this is very topical, I think. AI. I understand a lot of people are feeling reluctant to use AI, saying that AI is not as clever, as human beings. Some of our clients, they very clearly stated that they don't want AI for our translation or to do part of the job at least, and if not all. However, Bing Copilot, they have done the largest study on AI. I encourage you to read that article. And it said here what occupation. In fact, here, if you can read that table 3 shows that 40 occupations. Now, interpreters and the translators are on the top of the list with 98% of their work activities overlapping with frequent Copilot tasks with very high completion rate and the scope scores. 98% of the people, our reading is that 90% of the people are using AI. We're on the top of the list using AI to translate and to interpret. So this is translation and also interpreting. AI is different from machine interpreting or translation. Very different. It's revolutionarily different. That is why that AI is widely used, whether you recognize it or not. So here I have some issues here. I put it here on the left side. We have the applications of AI in preparation, for example, the vocabulary and also background information. And nowadays, probably you would place it, every country is worried about their own security. In the past, we get all the briefing papers. Nowadays, we only get vocabulary lists. And vocabulary lists, you just go online doing research yourself. So in the past, I would simply go to ABC, go to The Age, go to different newspapers, media outlets to study what the topics would cover between the two countries or between international organizations. Nowadays, with AI, I can put the vocabulary in and I can add some vocabulary to it and ask ChatGPT or other AI to help me. And they will come back with very good solution. So it helped me a great deal. And also, I'm not disclosing anything and I just doing research. AI is helping us greatly. And here, computer assisted or computer aided interpreting with captions and also some apps can give you some special terminology in certain area. And that itself is great help because sometimes people are talking about like chemical stuff or mining or some other area which are very specialized we are not used to. And captioning is now very accurate. It helps. So you can use in those areas. However, AI, again, in a lot of areas we can't use. For example, in court hearing, also in, as I said here, number 3, we have state-to-state diplomatic bilateral meetings and also some very important business negotiations and talks and also hospitals, high risks, those areas we can't use. However, AI is changing very rapidly. We don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So AI is widely being used by our industry and also more and more by other industries. So that's the end of my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Charles, for this very rich talk about all the experiences you have. I have some questions before I go to the audience. So I'm bursting with all these questions, being a professional translator, interpreter myself. So very interesting, you showed the first video about the Trump, saying things that completely make no sense mathematically. And then in the end, you came back to that point and saying that when they make mistakes like OPEC or APEC, you do need to correct. And also, rightly so, you corrected me using Monash and instead of Deacon. So this factual error is easier to correct and doesn't cause any offense. But the Trump's one is a bit tricky. So my question is, if you were there when Trump said all that, nonsensical things, would you correct him?
Probably not. The reason being, he is very famous, and we know that Twitter and also fact checkers and all those different apps, they found out that he has been lying all the time, almost every minute, really. So when he was making a mistake like this, we know mathematically it's so inaccurate, and we know that he's trying to make his face more glorious. So I would simply interpret whatever he says in that sense. But other people, if they wouldn't make so many mistakes, and if they made one error, I would just correct it. I know it's clearly it's an error, and if you're following the leaders, for the whole state visit, it is an error, so you will correct it.
I agree with you. That's a very good answer and a very good judgment on the circumstances. And what you say is so true. Whatever he is, people can see it. It doesn't need your help. So yeah, and then I think you touched in your abstract, not being biased by your personal views, so not influenced. So back to being the interpreter for state leaders, because lots of talks are on high level and the time is very tight and all sorts. How much brief information are you provided? Are you given beforehand?
Now, it has changed over the time. When I started out, I went to China with Australian leaders, quite often they give me a quite thick book. It's briefing paper, and what Australian stands and what questions we want to say and what questions China may ask. This is a very standard format, right? Chinese side has the same thing. So I get the whole thick book. And then later, they don't give it to me beforehand. They give it to me on the plane. And then more and more, and they just give me a vocabulary list. And also the night before, I would go in PMO, Prime Minister's office, the briefing officer or relevant officer would tell me what PM or ministers would like will say, and so I know what they were going to say. I'm mentally prepared, and I can take some notes. So that's our Bible. We must have our notes and also 3 pens, just in case one of the pens doesn't work. So go there and take notes and take vocabulary and get ready.
Very good advice and tips. Yes, notebook and pencils. Do they ever provide you scripts, speech scripts, if the speech will be standard speech, so prepared speech? Do they ever provide it to you beforehand?
Mostly not. Again, in the past, we get speech notes, but not anymore. And the other thing is Chinese leaders and Western leaders are very different. Chinese leaders, normally they read speeches prepared for them. And Western leaders, you give them a speech and often they don't read it. They know because they've been trained how to debate in the parliament every year, and they have to meet the media, they have to talk to voters, all sorts of people. So they are used to it. And so they have speech notes, but also they have what we call a cheat card. So a card with the main points. So they'll talk. And so even you may have speech notes, but again, sometimes it's helpful. Quite often, it's a distraction for us.
So I can imagine it's quite challenging, without a lot of prior material. But we can also understand that they do not want to give to you too much lead time. But in relation to that, can you or has that ever happened? Can you ask question if you missed something? Can you ask the speaker, the leader, to ask them what is it or say it again? Has that ever been allowed?
Well, it is allowed, but what will never happen to me. We just interpret very accurately, and we take notes, and sometimes we take very good notes. Very importantly, as I said before, that when President Trump and President Putin were meeting, there were only 4 of them, and also happened in my situation quite a few times. And because the leaders cannot really take notes, and they were talking, but I was taking notes, and afterwards I was writing down all the notes and submitted to relevant departments. So I have to have very good notes. And also we've been briefed, and also we know what's happening in Australia. That is why the federal government or Australian government, they use almost the same interpreter all the time, and they follow the leader through. They know what our stance is, and we know the policies, and we know the points, so we're not making mistakes. But we're all humans, and including like Zhang Lu was corrected by Premier Li Keqiang, and I was corrected by Kevin Rudd. So
Kevin liked to correct Chinese speakers. Yeah, and then really related to your answer, it's really interesting and very good, very insightful. Yes, obviously the more familiar you are with the leaders and the circumstances, the easier, the better, the more accurate you will be able to do the job. So Australian leaders, you follow them frequently, so you get to them a bit more, know more, because you know, we know the way they speak, their accent, the expressions that they use. But sometimes you just suddenly drop in to interpret for someone randomly, like you don't know them that very well. Would that make it a bit more difficult? The accent, the way they speak.
Oh, it would be very difficult, very difficult. I mean, I can give you an example. When Premier Lee and Madam Premier, his wife, and she's a professor of English. Now, their English level, particularly his wife's English, is very, very good. However, when we were in New Zealand, I remember she speaks beautiful English, but she doesn't understand New Zealand and Australian accent. And after the leaders were speaking, I remember the Chinese interpreter said, "Oh, Zhongli Furen, the Madam Premier doesn't need interpreting." And so I stopped, and then she had no reaction. And then once the Prime Minister of New Zealand said something, I interpreted, and she suddenly reacted. So it shows that she didn't really understand the Australian or New Zealand accent, but they can express very clearly.
Yeah, and you mentioned that for the first time you were allowed to sit there next to the Prime Minister to have a proper dinner, so that's very nice. But are you in the same vein? Are you allowed to talk to the guests? Like when we are trained as a professional interpreter, especially court, legal interpreter, you're not allowed to speak to your client or not have a chit chat. For interpreting for state leaders, are you allowed for chit chat?
I think it has to be natural, because if the Premier is asking you a question personally, you have to answer. And but you're trying to shorten that question and not becoming a long conversation. And so yes, well, including, I remember Premier Li Keqiang asked me a few questions and I answered, and that's it. And as I said, when Madam Fu Ying, the ambassador to Australia, introduced me to Premier Wen Jiabao, and he asked me questions, and I answered. After that, I don't know what to say, because we're not on the same page. So I said, "Do you want a cup of tea?"
Yeah, so, and obviously the very important question around confidentiality. Confidentiality is so important, but confidentiality can be interpreted, used, and rules around all sorts in many ways. For example, can you tell people, like public, before you take on a task? Or
No.
that's okay, that's
No, no.
confidential.
But a lot of people ask me, saying that, "Oh, Prime Minister is going to China. Are you going?" I said, "I have no idea." Quite often I do not know. And the media already knew, but the Prime Ministers and the Cabinet Department would only engage me like a week before. So I did not know. Even I knew, but I said, I don't know.
Like a
Only
jury,
afterwards.
yeah, like a jury members, you are not allowed to talk to other
No,
people. Yeah,
no.
that's interesting. And also in confidentiality as well, are you allowed to talk to other people about the leaders that you interpret, their personal traits, or what happened during the event?
No.
No. So
No.
that's
I only if people ask me, I
Mm.
only quote what the media said, mostly from ABC. I
Yeah.
said, ABC said this, ABC said that, and I would not say, "Oh no," what he said.
That's very important advice and
Thank you.
important rule that interpreters should follow. The other thing is because you are mostly translate for you are assigned, employed, hired by Australian leaders on this side. Does confidentiality from China's side apply to you as well?
Well, I signed a confidentiality agreement with the Australian government. The Chinese side is related to bilateral meeting between Australia and China, so I would not disclose anything Chinese Prime Minister or President say to Australia either, because that's related to Australia. So it's related to the bilateral meeting, so I would not disclose anything either.
Very interesting, the life you're having. So I'm just wondering, at the end of someday, you're going to write your memoir.
Probably
and all
not.
those okay, I have another two questions before I go to audience. What is the most difficult thing that you have encountered in your 40-year career? I mean, you would have a few, but just give us an example.
I think one of them was a trilateral meeting between China, Japan, and Australia. And at that time, I think Japanese Prime Minister visited the Yasukuni Shrine, and that caused a lot of offense in China and a lot of unhappiness and demonstrations. And we were at this meeting, and whatever China said, proposed, Japan was against it. And what Japan proposed and China against it. So it was very difficult. And they were arguing very emotionally. So it's very difficult too. And you are sort of drawn into it, even though we are supposed to be quite independent, but they are yelling, all this. I think that was the most difficult. Other than that, I think even the relationship become very strained. Diplomats are still diplomats, but that one was the most difficult, I think.
Did you ever have any difficulties in translating jokes?
Well, I've encountered many, many times about the jokes. And I remember once we were in the cabinet room and the Chinese leadership was here, and then outside, Australian side said a joke, and then our leader said, "I'm waiting. Is my joke going to work?" So he's waiting to the reaction, and because it takes some time. And finally, the Chinese side laughed. He said, "Oh, this joke worked." So he's very happy. So jokes very, very difficult, and translated many times.
And sometimes like all the pictures of the photos that you showed us, you always look very serious, so. But were there any circumstances that something was so funny and you had to laugh, and you laughed, or you had to control yourself?
Oh no, there are many circumstances, many situations. It's very joyful, and it all depends on, I think, the photographers, which moment they took photos. And one of them, I think, very recent one, they took. That was, I was very happy standing. I'm not sure if it was in the PowerPoint I showed everyone, and that was very good too. This one I can show you. You can see?
Yes.
Bottom left-hand corner. So,
yeah.
And everyone was happy.
Yeah.
So I was smiling there.
You were smiling, but not laughing.
No,
that's very good.
probably not laughing. Or smiling. That's
what I meant.
That's as far as we could go.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very good. My last question, I promise, my last question, because we talk a lot about the word matters, and you mentioned a few times the accuracy of translation, so mistranslated or misheard or misused the words, and those are obviously kind of obvious in a way because they are missed. What happens to, because lots of things you need to translate into Chinese. And Chinese expressions these days, language moving very fast. Expressions used in mainland China are very likely different from in Hong Kong or in Taiwan. So do you need to learn the different expressions of the same words in different, in mainland China, in Taiwan, for example?
I'm very lucky that I translate in the very formal setting, diplomatic, political, defense, in this sense. So there are not many newly created trending terms. However, you remembered last year when I think the Prime Minister was meeting with the Premier, and the Chinese Premier said, "Oh, the Chinese media reported that 有一个帅哥, there's a handsome man outside."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
now this term causing so much trouble. Even now, the media in China this time still talking about the 帅哥. Again, this is linguistically such a challenging term because the word 帅哥 in Chinese, it's just a flattery
guy.
term
Yeah.
and cool guy, but
Mm.
it's no sexual connotation. Whereas in English, oh, he's handsome man, and media is still talking about it. So luckily, I was not translating it from Chinese into English, and the Chinese colleagues were doing that. And so these terms, exactly what you said,
Yeah.
is how do you deal with this? Because the connotations of the term 帅哥 and handsome man are very different.
It's exactly. I mean, 帅 doesn't necessarily mean so handsome in English. Yes, so yeah. Very good, very interesting. We can keep on talking, but I have to get to the audience. Udis, Udis, my colleague and your teacher.
Well, he is my teacher. He was my teacher.
So he has a question and probably doubled up with questions that I ask, but see how you answer. In one of your publications, you wrote how important it is to make the speaker look good, even if they are not good. How important is this in diplomatic and business interpreting setting?
I think it's very important. You understand what your leaders want to achieve, and we make the efforts to visit that country, to have an in-country visit. It shows that we pay great attention to the relationship. If they made a mistake or if they inadvertently not looking great, and it's our role to make, I think, the situation, the national interest is to make relationship good, not through one small inadvertent error or not even error, different posture by the leader, the things being badly reported. So I think it is very important because we know the national interests and we know what we want to achieve as a country.
Anonymous attendee asked this question would be difficult to answer because how would you define? How many leaders around the world have you met and interpreted, if you ever remember?
Well, I think not many. Well, how many leaders? Well, mostly Australian prime ministers and the Chinese leadership, and sometimes other English-speaking countries in the World Forum. Other than that, I don't do other languages. So sometimes in international conferences, you do interpreting for those people. You don't meet them, but you work to interpreting for them. Mostly for leaders around the world, mostly Chinese leadership over the years, and also Australian.
Question from Xing basically asking you, what motivated you to keep working in this field?
I think it's a sense of achievement and also you being recognized and that gives you the momentum to work harder, to do more. And plus, I love interpreting translation. Most importantly, apart from this, I don't know anything else. So that's the only sector I know.
Very honest answer, but very good one. Carl has a question. How does one get about getting interpreting jobs in diplomatic field? I'm sure that's many people would like to know.
I think to me was just a sheer coincidence because I started practice as an interpreter in the 1990s. There are not many interpreters. And again, China was opening up, and China was very eager to learn from the West, and a lot of delegations can come into Australia. And I was starting to do business interpreting. Austrade and DFAT saw me, and they were happy. So they recommended me to the department. So the rest is history. So I think it really shows that we need to take every job very seriously, and that we get good payback.
Yeah, agree. Open-minded and take on the opportunity to come. And also, you know, as you mentioned, that once they have someone they like to keep that one, especially you as is so competent, so no reason to keep changing. So that's also. I have Summer has a question and about an RT exam. Or system. So instead of relying solely on NATI exams, and interpreters should be required to complete supervised practice across various fields. Do you agree? What's your view?
I think NATI new system is on this track. The old system was what Samar said, that if you are good at 2 languages, you go and sit the examination, you pass that, and then bam, you are an interpreter or translator, become practitioner. However, NATI new certification system requires you to have proper training. Proper training indicates that you must have 2 years or 3 years as a student, and it in fact involves some practice too, and certain hours. So it is already on the same track. So practice is very important. And if Samar was saying that supervised practice, theoretically it is wonderful. However, who is going to supervise, and who is going to pay for it? And these are the practical problems too.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. That applies to teaching translation interpreting across universities in Australia. Another question, the person asks, how do you translate New South Wales State Treasurer in Chinese?
Okay, now this term, I think it depends on where you use it. If you're using it in the China sphere within China, there's a set term. It's called the 国库部长, 新州国库部长. And if you use 财政部长, 新州 New South Wales has a finance minister. And people say, oh, that's a 金融部长 or that's a 财务部长, but they're all the same term. So 国库部长 is the set term accepted by Chinese government system. Still, it's the same as at a federal level. So treasurer is diplomatically translated as 国库部长.
Jane Lee has a question, and she asks, have you ever had circumstances that you couldn't understand the speaker's accent?
Not from the Australian side. The Australian side, we're lucky that we only really have one accent in Australia. But I have had times I don't understand the Chinese speakers, and not in the diplomatic world, but in the business world, I didn't understand them. So I had to ask them to repeat, and or sometimes explain, or sometimes I have to ask them to write it down so I understand their accent.
Good advice. Shirley has a question, interesting. How long or how many minutes do leaders usually speak before they stop for you to translate?
Now, this is interesting. Early days, in fact, in China, we in the diplomatic world and also leaders' political talks, we always had CI, consecutive interpreting. But one of the Chinese senior leaders, he started to use simultaneous interpreting because he was having a bilateral meeting with Australia. And I was sitting next to our deputy prime minister, and the Chinese minister said, Australia is not a very big country, and there are not many issues to cover, but we spent the whole day, we only covered half of the contents on the agenda, and he was new in that ministry. He said, we should try and we should use simultaneous interpreting. But in those days, everyone thought simultaneous interpreting was not accurate, and people can't take quick enough notes. Therefore, people didn't and feel reluctant to use it worldwide. But he was very senior, so he started to use it. And after that, other ministries in China started to follow, and they found it's very accurate, it's very good. And then Chinese leadership started to use it. So this question from from Shirley, in fact, doesn't apply because it's all simultaneous now. So it doesn't matter how long they speak.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And the China side has two interpreters. Australia side has two interpreters doing simultaneous. So we have two separate booths.
Right, right. Oh, that's interesting. But sometimes not necessarily in this formal setting, you know, so a semi-formal setting and then consecutive. What is the longest time you ever had before the speakers?
Well, I think at this time, for example, we were in Shanghai. Prime
Mm.
Minister was meeting with Party Secretary of Shanghai,
Mm.
Secretary Chen, and that was consecutive. And
Mm.
quite often they speak probably 2.5 minutes, and sometimes 3, at most 4. It wouldn't be more than 4. But once, many years ago, again, I was with the Australian Deputy Prime Minister, and we were in China, in Shanghai, and in that setting, the Deputy PM was standing in front of the audience. They put the interpreter, the microphone behind the pillar, so he thought I was not there. So he spoke the whole time, and he finished his whole speech, and then he stopped, and then I couldn't give him a gesture to stop, and because I was behind the pillar, and the Consul General got really worried. He was going to give me the Deputy PM's speech, but he said, well, he didn't really follow everything, so it's better not to distract you. So I was taking notes, and many, many, many pages. So that kept saying that taking notes is very important. So,
Absolutely.
I forgot how many minutes. Many, many minutes. I remember that one.
Yes, I think taking notes is absolutely. I think you have been very good at that because I can see you at any circumstances you always have a notebook with you. So I think sometimes people feel a bit embarrassed. Oh, when they talk, maybe I should not take notes. I think you've been very professional, and that's one of the best advice to all practitioners. Take the notebook with you and take notes. You never know how long they are going to speak, so you won't get lost. This question, I think I touched on, but I'll try it and see whether you are able or allowed to answer. Of all the leaders you've interpreted, do you have a favorite?
I think it's hard to say. All the leaders have their own traits, their own characteristics. I think the more you work with them, they acknowledge you. In Australia, out of all the politicians, Penny Wong is very popular. She remembers, she has a very good memory, remembers people's names. And 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when she first came to Melbourne, after many years ago, she was Minister for Environment, and I did interpreting for her. And she came to Melbourne for the campaign of election, and I was asked to the interpreting for her for the Chinese community, and she still remembered me. So that warms your heart. I think different leaders have different characteristics.
Thank you so much. We're way beyond the time that we allowed, so I have to stop. I have a few questions, but I think I will leave it. So sorry for the listeners, but we're way past. And for the AR, which you touched on, I really say thank you so much for your wonderful talk, and especially the questions that you answered. There are no questions we couldn't ask, so that's so interesting, so fascinating. We should invite you back for more questions sessions. The last bit about the AR, I just really want to, you touched on very thoroughly about what AR can do and what AR cannot do. And the other day I was listening to a podcast, and this linguist mentioned one thing about AI. AI is very useful, but remember, if you think take human brain as an app, for app, use it. So use your brain. So that's so important. Thank you so much, Charles. I enjoyed it. And thank you for your insights, for your generosity, for sharing all this information and experiences and advice. So enjoyable, so enlightening. Thank you again. And
Thank you,
thanks the
Professor Han.
audience. Yeah, thank you, audience, for listening. And we see you all next time. Have a good evening.